Atheism cannot claim God is not good without using subjective definitions of good. The atheist dilemma. God's goodness cannot be objectively denied without borrowing from theism. Atheists sometimes argue against the goodness of God by pointing to the presence of suffering, evil, or events in the world that do not align with their understanding of goodness. This argument typically assumes that if God exists, he must be held to a moral standard that aligns with human expectations of what constitutes goodness. However, there is a deep flaw in this reasoning. In an atheistic worldview, there is no objective standard of good and evil, and any claim that God is not good rests on subjective definitions of morality. Here, I will explain why the atheist claim that God is not good collapses without an objective moral framework. I will also show that God's goodness is defined not by human emotional preferences, but by his purpose and objectives for creation, which are grounded in his nature. Atheists, with no rational basis for objective morality, can only offer subjective emotional objections, which cannot serve as rational critiques in their own worldview, where humans are simply matter robots, without free will or consciousness. 1. The problem of subjective morality in atheism. Atheism, particularly in its materialist form, views the universe as a system of matter and energy governed by physical laws, with no transcendence, purpose, or moral order. Humans are often viewed as complex biological machines, products of random evolutionary processes. In this worldview, concepts such as good and evil are merely human constructs, shaped by cultural evolution or biological survival mechanisms. Moral subjectivism. Without a transcendent source of morality, any notion of good or evil is purely subjective, meaning it is dependent on individual feelings, cultural norms, or evolutionary instincts. What is good for one society may be bad for another, but neither can claim objective truth for their moral standards. No objective moral law. If atheism is true, there is no objective moral law that exists independently of human opinion. Moral values would be nothing more than societal preferences or survival strategies with no binding authority. Therefore, any claim that God is not good in an atheistic framework must be recognized as a subjective emotional reaction, not a claim grounded in any objective standard of morality. This leads to a critical issue for atheists who claim that God is not good. On what objective basis can they make such a claim? If morality is subjective, then the atheist has no grounds for saying that God's actions are objectively wrong or evil. Instead, they are merely expressing personal discomfort or disagreement with the way God governs the universe, a reaction that carries no moral weight in a worldview where all values are subjective. 2. God's goodness is defined by his purpose and objectives for the universe. In contrast to the subjective morality of atheism, Christian theism provides a coherent and rational framework for understanding God's goodness. In Christian theology, God is good not because he conforms to human standards or preferences, but because he acts in accordance with his own holy, just, and purposeful nature. God's goodness and his purposes. God's goodness is defined by his perfect will, his divine nature, and his purposes for the universe. The ultimate standard of what is good is rooted in God's character, not in human preferences, cultural values, or emotions. Therefore, to say that God is good means that everything he does is consistent with his perfect wisdom, justice, love, and sovereignty. Creation and purpose. God, as the creator of the universe, has a purpose for his creation, and his actions are directed toward fulfilling that purpose. This means that what is good in the context of the universe is whatever aligns with God's will and objectives. Even if certain events or outcomes do not align with human expectations of goodness, they still fulfill God's perfect plan, which is good by definition. Human subjectivity versus divine purpose. Human beings, with their limited knowledge, may not always understand or appreciate God's objectives. We may have emotional objections to suffering, death, or aspects of nature that seem harsh or uncomfortable. However, our emotional reactions do not constitute rational objections to God's goodness. They are simply reflections of our subjective desires and discomforts, which may not align with God's grand design for the universe. For example, an atheist may object to the existence of predation in the animal kingdom, viewing it as cruel or unjust. However, this objection is rooted in emotional discomfort with the natural order, not a rational critique of God's goodness. In Christian theism, the presence of predation or natural suffering is part of a complex, purposeful creation that reflects both the fallen state of the world and God's ongoing work of redemption. Human discomfort with such realities does not negate God's goodness, which operates on a higher, eternal plane. 3. Atheism's denial of free will and consciousness undermines moral critique. Atheism often denies the existence of free will and consciousness as anything beyond brain processes and biological functions. In this worldview, human beings are nothing more than matter robots, highly complex machines whose thoughts, emotions, and decisions are determined by the laws of physics and the workings of the brain. This view further undermines any rational critique of God's goodness, because it leaves no room for meaningful moral agency or moral responsibility. No free will, no moral responsibility. In a universe where humans are merely biological machines, there is no genuine moral responsibility. If all human behavior is the result of deterministic processes, then moral judgments, whether about humans or about God, lose their significance. Without free will, humans cannot be held morally accountable for their actions, and the same logic applies when attempting to morally judge God. If atheists are simply matter robots, without free will or moral agency, then their judgments about what is good or evil are just byproducts of neural processes and biological programming. Such judgments carry no objective truth and cannot be used to construct a rational argument against God's moral nature. No consciousness, no moral experience. Furthermore, if consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity, as many atheists claim, then moral experience itself becomes illusory. Our sense of right and wrong, our awareness of moral duties, and our recognition of moral goodness would all be subjective mental phenomena with no real grounding in objective truth. In such a worldview, it becomes impossible to claim that God is objectively not good, because the very concept of goodness would be reduced to nothing more than subjective neural activity, a fleeting sensation with no real meaning. In denying the existence of free will and consciousness, atheism undermines its own ability to make meaningful moral claims, especially about a transcendent being like God. 4. Emotional objections are not rational objections. At the core of the atheist argument that God is not good lies a fundamentally emotional objection to certain aspects of the universe, such as suffering, natural disasters, or moral dilemmas. While these objections may carry emotional weight for individuals, they do not constitute rational arguments against God's goodness. Human emotions versus divine wisdom. Human emotions are inherently subjective and limited in scope. We tend to judge goodness based on what feels comfortable or aligns with our immediate desires. However, God's wisdom and understanding far exceed human emotions. What seems evil or unjust to us in a narrow context may, in fact, be part of a larger, redemptive plan that we cannot fully comprehend. God's ultimate objectives. In Christian theism, God's goodness is tied to his ultimate objectives for the universe, which include the redemption of humanity and the restoration of all things through Christ. These objectives often involve suffering, discipline, and moral challenges that, while difficult for humans to endure, serve a higher purpose in God's plan. Emotional discomfort with these realities does not provide a rational basis to claim that God is not good. 5. Conclusion. God's goodness cannot be denied without borrowing from theism. The atheist claim that God is not good collapses upon examination. Atheism, which provides no rational basis for objective good and evil, cannot offer a coherent moral critique of God. Without a transcendent moral standard, atheists must rely on subjective emotions and cultural preferences to argue against God's goodness, arguments that carry no weight in the objective sense. In Christian theism, God's goodness is defined not by human emotions or preferences but by His nature, purposes, and objectives for the universe. God is good because He acts in accordance with His perfect wisdom, justice, and love, creating and governing a universe that reflects His glory and serves His divine plan. Human emotional objections to this plan are understandable, but they do not constitute rational objections, particularly in a worldview where humans are reduced to matter robots, with no free will or moral agency. In the end, the only coherent framework for discussing the concepts of good and evil rests within the theistic worldview, where objective moral values are grounded in the character of a good, holy, and purposeful God. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and comment below if you agree or would like to add your thoughts. If you would like me to respond to your comment, please make a level 1 comment directly below the video. I will respond to all polite level 1 comments even if it takes me a while, due to other commitments.